Hello and welcome again to Android Design in Action. I'm your host, Roman Nurik.
Hey guys, my name's Adam Kosh.
And hi, I'm Nick Butcher.
And today we have a special episode once again on home screen widgets. We're going to take a look at a couple of home screen widgets at the very end, a couple of home screen widgets that we think do a good job. But first we're going to talk about designing home screen widgets, how you should approach them in general. We're going to talk about some design guidelines for widgets. And then talk about some of the constraints, since as a designer you may not be fully aware of the different types of things you can and can't do with home screen widgets. So with that, should we just jump right in?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Okay, so what is a home screen widget? Well, according to the design guidelines, the link down there is at the bottom. So widgets are an essential aspect of the home screen customization. You can imagine them as at-a-glance views of an app's most important data and functionality. I'd actually add latest data as well here, since widgets is very important that widgets are up to date. And it's accessible right from the user's home screen. Users can move widgets across from their home screen panels, and if supported, resize them. So that's another kind of important aspect, is the customizability. The fact that you can basically take a widget, move it wherever you want into whichever home screen you want, resize it to fit whatever icons are around it, and it's really kind of there to make it your own. So that's a home screen widget at a very high level kind of overview. The idea is that you basically take a part of your app and throw it onto the home screen.
And I think I just want to interject. It's one of the uniquely Android features that I love to see in an application. You can't get much more prime real estate than owning a small piece of the user's home screen. I mean, this is where most of their user journeys are going to start from. I know personally, you kind of on the bus, you're bored, you're just flicking around your phone, seeing what's going on. I love to be able to see the latest information. It's similar to the rules which Alex went through last week about notifications, but without that kind of pressing time sensitivity or a person waiting for it. It's kind of like the latest information that the user has opted in and requested to be notified about is kind of like brought and surfaced to the user. And it's such a great opportunity. It's such a shame when an application with this kind of information doesn't take advantage, I think, of a home screen widget.
Yeah, and almost like I'd say that there are certain users that if they add, or actually I guess if you add a home screen widget, it's probably a pretty strong signal that you're pretty passionate about the app. So some of your biggest power users will be the ones that use the home screen widget. Not everybody will use it. Not everybody decides to add it to their home screen, but the folks that do really probably love your content. So let's move on. So there are a few types of home screen widgets. So if you look at the design guidelines, they'll talk about these. But they're roughly broken up into three main categories. Information type widget, like weather, that shows you information at a glance. Control widgets that let you kind of make changes to a certain app or even the system in this case. And collection widgets, which basically let you see collections of data scrolling vertically to see kind of past items or other items in the list. And then, of course, there's the hybrid type of widget that includes multiple items. And most widgets are probably going to be kind of hybrid widgets. They'll include aspects of showing information, also allowing you access to control of the app, or potentially linking you into different parts of the app, which we'll talk about in a bit. And so, there are a couple of things that I think make a home screen widget really good. A couple of key important items. So the first is up to date. A home screen widget should be dynamic. It should never really be, just showing one piece of information from, a week ago or 2 weeks ago. It should really be something that the user, would open up their home screen and expect to, see the latest and greatest information. So for example, if it's, if you have for some reason a widget that does traffic, then you should probably show something that's very immediate, something that's relevant to the next few hours. If you have something, if you have a widget that's showing weather, also you want to show something that's kind of around now. You don't want to show weather from yesterday or something like that. As well as news articles or Gmail or any sort of list or feed type widget, you want to make sure to basically update the widget as soon as there's new data. So for example, in the case of Gmail, when you get a new email, there's a push message that's sent to the device that basically tells the Gmail application that, hey, there's a new email. So along with updating the cached content for Gmail, you should also make sure to trigger an update to the widget so that the widget can show that new information. And this is all possible as a developer. You can do this, of course, but as a designer, you should plan for push updates to your widget as the information comes in. You can also specify a periodic refresh, and absolutely, most widgets should probably refresh automatically unless there's, some great reason not to. And generally, you don't want to refresh too often. Like, for example, refreshing once a minute or once every few minutes even. That's pretty dangerous because you may kind of suck up battery life. And basically, you should probably optimize around refreshes of no more frequent than, say, once every half hour to an hour. That's probably the peak or the minimum bar for the minimum refresh time for a widget without using too much battery life. The other thing to note is that there's a lot of ways to tweak this, but you should also be conscious of when you update. So do you actually want to update when the screen or when the phone is sleeping, or do you want to update only when the phone is awake? And those are things that as a developer you can control, but as a designer you should also be aware of the different types of updates you can do for widgets. The other very important thing about a widget is that it should be actionable. So it's one thing to just show information, but generally the information you show is a snippet, right? So you don't actually just want to end the experience there. You want to somehow let the user dive deeper. If they actually care about the news story that you're showing, for example, in your widget, let them touch on that story and jump into the details for that so that they can read it.
Kind of be like a teaser almost. Think of like a newspaper headline, right? So you want to be able to tease the user and entice them to click through to more details, right?
Absolutely. And another thing to point out, and Nick, you'll talk about this later, but it's important to note that widgets can have different linkable regions. So make sure to be aware of what are the different types of things a user would want to do from this widget, and tailor to those different behaviors. The other thing is that a widget should be very, very customizable. So, again, the idea is that a user is granting their precious real estate to you, right? They're giving away part of their home screen to you. So you should make sure to make your widget as customizable as you feel is fit. In the sense that make sure that it is resizable. One of the worst things is when a user finds a widget that can't be resized or can't be or is too large, and then it's requesting too much of that precious real estate. So make sure that you design your widget to scale to different sizes. The other thing is that you generally want to show information that's custom tailored to the user. So, for example, if it's like a reader type thing or a feed consumption app, and the user has a list of favorite feeds they want to see, make sure to make that the default option, but let them obviously customize if they want to change things around. And then also note that there is the option of a configuration step. So before the user or after the user selects which widget to add, you have the option of providing an interstitial page where they can customize what should be shown in the widget. So make sure to make use of that as well. So again, in the case of the feed reader example, you want to give them the option to specify which feeds they'd like to see in that widget.
And that's probably preferable to having multiple widgets. I mean, even though the application can, rather than having 10, 15 different widgets for all different feeds your application might be able to produce, it's preferable to probably have just the one and a configuration step.
Right, and so in past versions of Android, you weren't able to create resizable widgets. So one of the biggest workarounds was let's just create 4 different widgets at 4 different sizes. On newer versions of the platform, you should hide away all those widgets. You should only really show the single widget that is resizable. That's the best approach. So let's move on and talk about the guidelines. Nick, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, so speaking of sizing, the way that the widget kind of system works is you have a number of cells on your home screen. So one cell is typically the size of an application shortcut. And so when you're designing your widget, you want to be cognizant of when users place the widget on the home screen, they're going to allocate it a number of cells. So hopefully you're using a resizable widget. So you want to, what you would do is you'd set the minimum number of cells, which would make sense for the information you're going to present, and then let the user kind of resize it by the number of cells. So when you come to actually designing that, you need to think about a few things. The first thing is that these cells aren't really that deterministic, right? There's a slight amount of flexibility in the actual size depending on the device implementation. So, if the home screen is in landscape or portrait, the actual number of pixels may vary slightly. So you need to be to build a lot of flexibility into your widget, really, so it can cope with a little bit of change either way of the ideal boundary sizes. And also, there's something worth bearing in mind, that the actual pixel size and the way that we handled margins has changed slightly in newer versions of Android. So previously, we used to leave it up to the developer to include any padding inside the bounds. So we just give them the cell and let them draw anywhere they liked within it, and would hope that they would include sensible amounts of paddings. We decided to change that in Android 4.0 primarily to help keep the home screen slightly more aligned, so that everyone was using similar of the same padding, so that everything kind of was on a nice tight grid. So you need to be aware of that. So we've included here the formula which we use to calculate the size of the cells in DP units. So bear these in mind when you're creating widgets. If you're targeting just 4.0 and above, you might want to use one formula. If you want to target older devices, then you need to bear in mind how much padding to allow for.
And one other thing I wanted to add is that this is kind of a good guideline to follow for minimum sizes, but note that the widget may actually grow. So for example, on a tablet, let's say, right, the home screen, if you rotate the device from landscape to portrait, the cells aren't actually still perfectly square. They're actually never perfectly square as far as I know. But the idea is that in landscape, the cells are slightly wider, and in portrait, the cells are slightly taller. So designing with this formula in mind will give you a good minimum size, but note that it can kind of grow and shrink based on different orientations as well as different devices. Different devices have slightly different cell sizes, but this is a very good guide.
Yeah, we'll get more into the layout controls that you can actually use in your app, but basically, bear that in mind and thinking in terms of scaling layouts and how they're going to stretch and fill these differently sized cells.
All right, so let's move on to the next slide around styling.
Yeah, so styling is very important. I think we were touched on it earlier. We were talking about you're occupying, the user giving you a small amount of space on their home screen. So you really need to kind of, fit in with the rest of the home screen and the other apps on there. So for that reason, you really want to be fitting in with the rest of the platform. So following the Hollow styling guidelines is a great start to fit in with what other widgets are going to look like on the home screen, as well as the standard visual style of, the app shortcuts and so on. We found that subtle transparency works really well here because the user has chosen their personal wallpaper, and so to work nicely with that and to go with their color scheme, we find that transparency can work quite well there, and it aligns also to the system widgets, how we do that as well.
And just one point I wanted to point out. So a lot of the system widgets actually have subtle transparency. It's not showing up well here in the slides, but the idea is that in very, very small parts of the widget, you'll see a little bit of the background peek through, and it kind of gives that extra feeling of digital, right? That this is actually it's a real object, but it's actually something that's living in my digital world.
Yeah, exactly, and I think the user has chosen the background on purpose. So you feel a type, sense of ownership with that connection with that, and I think it reinforces the fact that you're on the user's home screen, right? They've chosen to give you this piece of space as well, that you blend in well with it, like literally by using this kind of like design principles. And the last thing I wanted to call out here is, is even though you are, not in the full app mode, you want to be doing all the good practices, like including press state or inactive states for all your elements, because they are still interactive elements and they still need to respond to touch.
The other thing about press states is that since again you're on the user's home screen where generally the press states are kind of using a blue glow, for example, for icons, or for different widgets they're probably using that kind of semi-transparent blue overlay. You want to use a similar press state if possible, if it fits in with your theme, because again we generally want the home screen to feel like a single unified experience, and as much as widgets can do to fall in place and just kind of be cohesive with the rest of the launcher, that's very important.
Yeah, I mean, it's just as your job when you're building an app is to marry your brand's visual style with the Android visual style. I mean, this is all the more like leaning towards the default Android visual style on the home screen, because you're going to be shoulder to shoulder with all these with other players, as it were.
Right.
Yeah, personally, if the styling and the padding are off for a particular widget, I'm probably going to remove it from my home screen. Like, it just doesn't fit in with the flow of the home screen. So I think this slide and the previous slide are very important to consider.
Yeah, home screens are precious things. There's whole
Very precious,
communities
yeah.
of people just around sharing images of how they've configured their home screen, right? People get very passionate about this stuff, so
Yeah, I mean,
being very respectful.
It's something you see, you know, I don't know about a few hundred times a day, but you see
Possibly
you see
a few
it
hundred times.
possibly 100 times a day. So you want to make it as beautiful as possible.
Okay, and next up is a personal bugbear of mine, which is applications which don't provide a preview image. So you can provide one preview image per widget, and this is used not only in the tray here, so when I'm going through selecting a widget, I go into the widget tray and then long press one to pick it up and then place it on my home screen. But also when I'm placing it, a slightly semi-transparent version will be, I'll hold on to it and hover it to place it where I want on the home screen. So it's really important to include this visual image of what the widget's going to look like. You need to, when you're creating these, when they're placed into the tray, you'll be aware that you have this kind of landscape cropped representation. So if you provide a very tall widget, it is going to do like a center top crop. So if you look in this example we're showing here, the photo gallery widget is it's showing kind of like the top half almost of the preview image, which is fine, but just bear that in mind when you're designing the asset, that it may be displayed as such. And then when I pick it up to place it on the home screen, it will display the whole image in this kind of semi-transparent way. And also when you're creating this, you want to be cognizant not to be leaking any personal data or anything like that. You want to create these with test data just when you're designing them.
One general technique that I've used when creating widgets is basically, you know, take a screenshot of the widget, open it up in Photoshop, and you know, I'm guessing that as a designer you probably have some of the source assets anyway. But drop in the source assets on top of your screenshot, kind of, you know, line things up appropriately, and then just replace all the real data with dummy data, and then export that as a PNG file and drop it in as a preview image. The other thing to note about preview images is that you should try to avoid showing any extra transparent pixels around the sides of the preview image, since the launcher will automatically apply padding and margins so that your preview image isn't kind of flush with the bounds of its cell. Should we move on?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
And this is a few more guidelines. We touched briefly on the configuration, but this is kind of an example of what it might look like. So if you drop the Google Play, the library widget, which shows you all your books and movies you've been watching lately, you'll get this dialog which will pop up offering you, if you want to personalize it, just one of the media sources. So some general guidelines about creating these configuration steps is you want to keep it very light. I mean, you do want to make it personalizable, but you don't want to be leading the user through, 5, 6, 7 deep series of steps. This is supposed to be quite a light process to grab something and place it onto the home screen. So do keep that in mind. And the other thing is we do recommend is to use a dialogue style here. This is one of the very few cases, I guess, where we recommend a dialogue, just to keep the user in the context that you are actually working on something on the home screen and you're not like deep in the app and forgetting where they were coming from.
Absolutely.
So
moving on to linking.
Go a little bit deeper about linking through to content. So as we talked about earlier, it's all about another avenue to expose your content. So you want to be having items of content. So here in this email widget, individual emails, or might be individual news stories, and they want to be deep links straight through to that content. This isn't just a launcher widget. They want to be able to go straight, have these other avenues go straight to read more about it. But you also want to include access points into your other common points in your application the user might want to get to. So typically we see that as being the top level of the application, and quite often you'll use the your app icon in the top left, like similar to the action bar pattern, as a quick access to the root of the application. So that means the user doesn't have to have, if you didn't have this, you might have this deep links through to the emails, but then you might also have to have an email shortcut. You want to remove that need. If the user's going all out and putting a widget on the home screen, they don't want to have a shortcut to the application as well. It's kind of one or the other. So give them a way to get to the top level of the app, as well as the common tasks. So in the email example, again, creating a new email is an example here. It might be taking a photo, whatever it might be. And just a little note there, mostly for the developers out there really, is that our recommendations on navigation is that if you do deep link into the application, you should be synthesizing the task stack.
All right, let's move on to the lock screen, one of my favorite parts of widget framework?
Yes, so one of the new shiny features in Android 4.2 is the ability to place widgets not only on the home screen but on the lock screen. And talk about immediate info and control. You don't get much more immediate than that. This is like zero interaction information. You just had to turn the phone on and that's it, right? You don't even have to unlock it. So some things to be aware of is that we allow slightly less personalization options on the lock screen. Widgets essentially run in two sizes. So you can see on the slide here, there's an example of the calendar widget. So either you have the ability to unlock, so that could be the slide to unlock or some kind of like secure pin mode, in which case the widget is in like a collapse state, or it takes up the whole screen. There's no kind of in-between state.
There's another thing to note on that is that you actually can have multiple widgets on the lock screen. This is just an example of one, but as of Android 4.2, you can actually add more items to the left, or I believe they're actually all to the left. To the right, there's the camera, but to the left, you can add other items. So where the center widget, where the first thing you see when you unlock or when you press the power button, the first thing you see may be the clock. If you swipe to the left, you can actually add widgets there, and those will always be expanded. The other thing I wanted to
if you look at the back screenshot, the expanded calendar view, you can see there's an extra panel peeking in to the side. You can make that out in the screenshot. But yeah, you can swipe across the other ones.
The other thing to note is that on tablets, there is no collapsed view. There's just expanded view. This is kind of the current presentation of things. I mean, these things may change in the future, and certainly, I don't think we have guidance on third-party devices or other OEMs how they would present lock screen widgets. There are certainly lots of different options, but the core API, you should assume that there will be a collapsed and expanded state. In some cases, no collapsed state.
And speaking of the current presentation, right now we darken the wallpaper slightly. I think it's about 40%.
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. I forget exactly. So all of our, the stock controls, like to actually go ahead and unlock the device and so on, are monochrome white on top of that, and that contrasts well with, because obviously the user can control what the wallpaper is behind. So yeah, using white as the kind of the main color in your design will work well here, because it's at the moment guaranteed to kind of like contrast.
Yeah, one quick note on the development side is it's just really one extra XML attribute that you need to add to make your widget compatible with both the home screen and the lock screen. But obviously not all home screen widgets should be placed or should be allowed to be placed on the lock screen. It really comes down to the application and the information you're trying to display.
Yeah, and you may even want to, and by the way, when you add a lock screen widget, you do, again, have the option of providing a configuration step. You may want to ask the user, what are you comfortable showing on the lock screen? Do you want to show all the information, or maybe just a snippet of information that doesn't include personal information or contact information from other people? But definitely keep in mind that there's this extra place here where you potentially have insecure access to the device. Somebody can just walk by the user's cubicle, see their phone, and if this is a bad person, they can take a look at the phone. If they don't know the pattern, they'll still be able to access the lock screen widgets. So if those have insecure information, that's a problem.
So I'm probably not going to put my bank account balance into a lock screen widget, but something like a to-do list, like one of my favorite to-do lists that I use, it lets me do a lock screen widget. So I'm shopping, I'm walking around the shops, and I don't even have to unlock my device to tick things off as I walk around the aisles, place them in my basket. I can just literally turn the screen on, tick, 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 done.
Yep.
It's great.
Awesome.
Okay. Constraints.
Oh, actually, there's one more thing that I wanted to mention. When you actually touch an item on a lock screen widget, like let's say you were to touch this calendar item, you'd actually be given the option first to unlock. If you don't unlock the device, it'll actually just cancel that click. So keep in mind that what's on the widget is insecure, but once you touch on something, it will be secure. So constraints. Should we talk about constraints? So there are a couple of constraints that you should keep in mind when you're designing home screen widgets. The first is there isn't really support for custom fonts. So from a developer standpoint, in your app, you can actually just specify a font file, a TrueType font file to use for a given view, like a label or a piece of edit text or something like that. But on widgets, there's no real way to do that. There is a hack. You can obviously render the text into a bitmap into an image and throw that into the widget, but that's just a really, really bad hack. It's very bad for performance, things like that. So just avoid custom fonts if possible. There's also no opportunity for custom animations. This is something that a few designers have asked me, like, what can I really do? Can I make cool transitions when I press one thing, the widget rotates? Unfortunately, the widget framework right now is a little static. So, if you touch on something in the widget, you can update the widget. You can change the contents, show something expand or whatnot, but you won't be able to animate it really well. So, you just kind of assume that there won't be animations. One thing to note is that if you're touching an item and jumping into the full screen view, like deep linking into content, as of Android 4.1, there is something called activity options, where you can basically create kind of like a zoom up animation from the content, but that's basically the limit of the animation abilities you can do with widgets. Actually, there is also the option of like crossfading between views. We'll talk about that in a second. Also, there's no horizontal gesture support. So, the home screen, the main way you navigate the home screen and the lock screen is you swipe left and right to change between your different screens. Since that's a very kind of important gesture, we don't allow widgets to contain views that can horizontally scroll as well. So the only type of scrolling or kind of flinging or anything like that you can do is vertical, and to do that you need to use one of the specific views, which we'll talk about. Also, vertical scrolling is only available as of Android 3.0. Resizability, basically the ability to long press on the widget and then get those nice little resize handles, is only in Android 3.1. And then we added this option to change the layout of your widget based on its size dynamically. And so basically after you resize, you can update the layout of the widget. And that was added in Jelly Bean, Android 4.1. So in earlier versions, you're basically kind of stuck with your layout once you placed it and even after you resized it until the next time you updated it.
And I think we mentioned this lock screen widgets are 4.2 plus as well.
Right. So those are some of the constraints. The other things to keep in mind is that there are certain things you just can't do in widgets. For example, you can't play video in widgets. You can't you can't play a game in a widget. You can't like draw arbitrary stuff into the widget. There are a few kind of standard things that you can do though. The common things like text labels and images and buttons, those work. There's support for loading spinners as well. Progress bars as well, although like we mentioned before, you don't want to update the widget very, very frequently, so it's not really feasible to have a progress bar that updates, as you're downloading something, for example. So progress bars you should probably only use for like, percent watched, for example. If the widget is showing the latest TV show or episode that I've seen, and I've seen 50% of it, maybe you can use a progress bar to show that I've seen 50% of it, but don't show something that is supposed to update very, very frequently. You can also show an in-place carousel. Basically, you have like an image in place in the widget, and then after a few seconds, it kind of fades out into another image. You can do something like that. A good example of that is the news and weather widget that comes by default with like Nexus 4, things like that. And that's kind of an alternative to a collection widget that basically lets you scroll up and down. And then you can add some clocks in there if you really want. Also for scrollable elements, you can have list views, and by list view I don't mean specifically basically a view containing a list item or like a piece of text followed by another piece of text. Your list items themselves, the items you show in this list view, can be fairly complex. You can do lots of different things in them. So don't treat this more as a list view. Think of it more as like a basic kind of like collection view that can show list items or different presentations.
The email and calendar examples, I guess we showed briefly earlier, good examples of that, where you can have show quite a lot of different bespoke content in that list view and have a user flick through it.
And also you can have grid views. So for example, the bookmarks widget lets you see kind of a 2-column view of bookmarks. So that's another example, and you can actually replicate that using a list view as well. And then finally stack view, which we'll show an example of in a bit. And then most of the layout types, as a designer, you may not be aware of the different layout types, but there are things like relative layout, where things are arranged relative to one another, linear layout, where things are arranged linearly, and frame layout and things like that. All those main ones are supported. So if it's, you have a lot of options in terms of where things are placed within the widget. So that's kind of one of the more open parts of the widget system. So those are the supported UI elements. Let's actually then just jump into examples, since I think we're probably running a little low on time.
Yeah. All right. Let's. So we had some screenshots, but we thought, hey, we've actually got a device connected. Why don't we actually demo these widgets live?
Yeah.
So we added just a few widgets that we like to the home screen of this device. First of all, we've got some news widgets. There's the New York Times and the BBC News widgets. They're both resizable widgets, both vertically scrolling. So here you can see the New York Times. You've got a list of different news articles, some headline text, some summary text, and sort of an image in most cases here on the right.
It's quite nice. Resizing it?
Sorry?
You want to show how the resizing works?
Yeah, you just pick up the widget and drop it, and then you can very easily resize it right there. And then the BBC News widget, actually what I might do is flip this guy over here so you can see a bit better. This is quite a nice widget as well. And when you expand it out there, it actually grows the columns quite nicely here.
So it's probably a grid view, right? I'm guessing that's a grid view. So
that's a great example. I mean, this is coming for free, so it's a grid view, but you want your widget to dynamically resize, like based on, if I give it more horizontal real estate, then you might change the representation of the story, like going into multiple rows of a grid, or you might show a more detailed headline or something along those lines. You want your widget to react and make the most of that space.
Yeah, I really like these widgets. Quite nice for news widgets. And I think both of them, when you add them, you get to configure which category of news that you want to actually show here. So you can show technology news on your home screen if that's what's interesting to you, or you can show top news in these cases. So that's some news widgets. This is the Google Play My Library widget, which is quite nice because actually, how much room do we have here?
Yeah, that's fine.
If you see that as you resize it and let go of the resizing handles, it relays itself out, I guess you would say. And it's quite nice because it fits dynamically into sort of all sorts of different sizes here. So you can have a small one if that's what you want to use on your home screen. You can have it be wider widget here, and it shows the sort of various items for your Play library.
It's one of my favorite widgets, actually. I think it's a great example of what Ren was talking about earlier, about having really current, really up-to-date information. So if you have a lot of information in Play, so if you use Play Music and books and everything and movies, then it'll update, so it's very easy to get back to what you were last doing. So if I'm reading a book on my phone on my commute home and I get home, I can just pick up my tablet and the widget's updated to show that that book is the most prominent thing in the widget, and I can just click it to get straight back to where I was, which is a brilliant use of it, I think.
Yeah, it's quite nice. Over here we've got some sort of miscellaneous widgets. We've got the Songkick widget here, which shows sort of your plans, upcoming concerts that you have planned. We've got the Google Plus widget. And the Google Plus widget actually, it lets you, it's not a collection widget, but it lets you flip between different items using a button on screen. So you just press this button and flip through the different items. And I generally prefer the collection type widget, but this is definitely another way to kind of focus on a single item and actively have the user switch between them. And down the bottom, it's the Play Music widget. Yeah, what's going on here? Which one is that? That's the Currents widget. Ah, so Currents is probably stuck loading something. Stuck loading something. Oh, well. It's a collections widget again. It's actually similar to this YouTube widget here. Where you can flip between the different cards. And that's an example of a stack view widget. Yeah. So it's another type of collection, but it's just presented in a different way. Yeah, the current one is quite nice. To auto advance, which is kind of fun. So if you have something like YouTube where there's probably telling you about the latest videos added to a playlist, you can leave it there on the home screen and it'll actually rotate through and highlight that content, which is kind of cool. Yeah, it's a good way to present passive content, right? So not like emails, for example, that are obviously very important to the user, but featured items or recommended items that the user may find enjoyable. And then finally, we've got sort of a collection of clock widgets. And actually, the one in the center there is a dash clock widget built by Roman Urich himself. And it's also open source as well, so it's actually a good one for developers and designers to go look at how it was built. And the way these work, I actually just want to point out, is that this is an analog clock,
An analog clock, actually, you can customize as a designer. You can tweak the hour hand, the minute hand, and basically the system just rotates those PNG files to make it right. And then here there's something called a text clock that basically you just give it what part of the time you want to show, and it shows that, and you can customize the different like typography aspects like font weight and things like that, as well as colors and so on.
Yeah, and you can see here as you resize the dash clock widget, it goes into a sort of summary view, and as you expand it, it jumps back out again. So that's it for some of the demos, right?
Yeah.
Should we jump back? Do we have any?
I think that was it. So, all right, that was a.
There's one more thing which I've seen a couple of applications do is, like we were saying earlier, a home screen widget is prime real estate on the user's home screen, and the fact that they've put you on the home screen means they're probably quite engaged with your product. So I think it's actually an opportunity to use them quite intelligently. So yes, you can highlight the newest, latest information. But one interesting example I've seen is a shopping app where if you've abandoned a shopping cart, it has a widget showing you the latest. Offers or whatever it is targeted to the user, but it will actually insert a little item at the top saying, why don't you finish your journey, and so on and so forth. So I think of them, remember that they're small versions of your app almost, not just a way to highlight your interesting content. So think about interesting ways that you can use your home screen widgets.
Absolutely. Also, we should probably mention there's some categories. If you're building an app in a certain category, you pretty much have to build a widget, or else your users will comment like, "Where is your widget?" A couple of examples. If you're building a sports app, you should probably have a scores widget for your league or for whatever information you have. If you're building a music app, absolutely have transport controls. So yeah, definitely build a widget. All right, well, with that, thanks for joining. A couple of announcements before we sign off. As we mentioned a few weeks ago on the show, the Android Design in Action show and the App Clinic show, we're actually starting to kind of integrate a little better. So when we do a topic on Tuesday, the folks over in Mountain View, California will be doing the same topic, the same general category on Friday. So tune in this Friday to the App Clinic to check out their thoughts on home screen widgets. All right, with that, I'm your host, Roman Nurk.
See you guys, Adam Kosh.
Bye from Nick Butcher.
All right, see you guys next week.